Tēnā koutou katoa and good evening, everyone. The Vibe series that we have here is about connection, bringing people together to address some of the key issues we have, to spark ideas, spark new conversations, and to learn from one another. I think this topic is particularly close to my heart. I chair the Lincoln University Sustainability Task Force. I'm always interested in some of those real challenges around fuel and the future of those, and how we face a transition towards a more resilient, low emission systems. Energy sits at the heart of that transition. Diesel and liquid fuels underpin much of the modern agriculture and land-based production, yet they are also at the centre of conversations about resilience, affordability, and decarbonisation. And today's discussion should help us in trying to understand that. To start with, I'm pleased to introduce Professor Rainer Hoffmann from Lincoln University. Rainer's experience explores how plants respond to environmental stress and how this knowledge supports climate resilience and sustainable agriculture in New Zealand and the Pacific region. Today, he'll give some brief examples of the work in the space and how this may relate to the topic of our keynote presentation, which will come after by Dr. Craig Anderson, who I'll introduce shortly. Rainer, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll set the scene here, and what I'll do, my mission here is to provide you with an overview of agricultural topics in the space of sustainability that are actually really dependent on the availability of energy and particularly diesel, and what we've been doing here at Lincoln, but also in the Pacific Islands. So the topic that I'll talk about is called SAI, so Sustainable Agricultural Intensification, which basically means you are working within the bounds of nature, and yet you're producing a high yield and even increase your yield with methods that can be described as these 5 key points. So this is about working with soils, working with crops, with the knowledge of what cultivars and what species to use, and also very effective water management and pest management. And you could place that in the context of, or could in the umbrella term be called agroecology. You will have heard about sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture. So the topic of sustainable agricultural intensification is increasing in the numbers in terms of publications. There's more and more research coming out, and it is also now possible to have meta-analyses where you can analyze thousands of studies and look at the overall outcome of a new development, a new system. And what we have seen is that sustainable agricultural intensification, when you look at studies like in South Asia here, you get better responses in regard to climate change, in regard to ecosystem protection, as well as production and financial profitability. So this is comparing SAI systems against conventional systems, and the evidence could not be clearer that those sustainable systems actually have benefits for this idea of sustainable agricultural intensification. Here at Lincoln, we do many different studies. So this shows you just a very sharp snapshot of work that where we use our knowledge of legumes and include hybrid materials so that we can grow, for example, as you can see here, stronger roots into legumes that are of essential importance to New Zealand's agriculture. Here's my student Lulu, PhD student, who is looking at reed clover as one of those legumes and its contribution to grass systems, where we have shown that when you combine legumes and use them, the right legume in the right environment, you're increasing yield by about 50% compared to growing grass by itself. So it's beneficial for the grass as well as for the legume that we looked at. So these are examples from Lincoln. I'm just giving you a few snapshots here so that we can have as much time as we can with Craig. Grant mentioned that we're also working in the Pacific Islands, and there this term of sustainable agricultural intensification, agroecology, is basically the norm. And so the FAO, the World Bank, they expect us as researchers now to do sustainable agricultural intensification work. They don't want to fund any conventional work. They want to see that we can grow plants and animals with less chemical fertilizer and also pesticides. And so I'll show you a few examples of what we've done in that regard. And so that is funded by the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research from the Australian government. The team we have put together is from, so ACI is the funding body, University of Melbourne, Lincoln, MODI is a rural development trust in Tonga, and then USP, the University of South Pacific, and the Pacific Community, which is a development agency in the Pacific. And we looked at Samoa in particular, both islands, and what we did was we did a 1-year survey, listening to the farmers, their ideas, their challenges, and also possible solutions. And then we got into the process of testing some of these systems that the farmers asked us to investigate, because when you get research funding, you can do things that farmers by themselves can't really do. And so I'll just tell you a couple of stories that are shown in these pictures. We got the advice from the farmer president of Samoa that he would like us to trial sheep in taro plantations. And so we created an experiment. First, we showed our funder that this is coming from the farmers, so it is from the ground up, which is what is seen to be much more valuable than the other way around. And we put these sheep into the taro fields. And interestingly, following that farmer's recommendation, the sheep did not eat the taro plants. Instead, they ate the weeds around the taro. They also created fertilizer through their experiment, and they became a new income source for the farmer to the wheat that was now available. And so those 3 advantages by themselves made it well and truly worth for the farmer to switch into a system. The cost is buying a fence, but with our data, we can now go to the governments of Samoa and Tonga and other nations, and they have already committed to funding farmers who want to switch into the system. The fence also has the advantage that wild pigs and dogs don't go into the field anymore, which in itself increases the yield because the sheep stay alive and the taro is not eaten by the pigs. So that's sustainable agricultural intensification. It is using sustainable methods to increase yield and also income. One practical example. The other one is shown here, where we use machines like this. It's called a TDR, which is a soil moisture probe, which you can put into the soil, and you can see one of our master students in Samoa using the machine, and here we're measuring it in Tonga under the mulching. You can see here the mulch from the fronds, and what we've seen is that soil moisture is strongly increased, 50% under these mulches, 30% under sheep grazing, and 20% in intercropping. So again, you're increasing the quality of your soil by using these methods, very simple methods. And so that really is my main message, that there are approaches that can increase yield. We've seen the data, it works. It is it's something that works particularly well in economies where there is already a readiness for using these more simpler methods. And it'll be interesting to relate that now with Craig's talk, where these systems, of course, have much less input, much less need for things like diesel, and how that will possibly also could be a role model for us when we go forward. And so I very much look forward to Craig to talk about his topic, and Grant will introduce you now.
Thank you. Thank you, Rana. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Craig Anderson from the Bioeconomy Science Institute. Craig's work spans from microbial processes to soil to global energy systems, blending biology, chemistry, and sustainability. He is passionate about how science can underpin resilient, sustainable solutions for agriculture and energy, and his research bridges the gap between science, industry, and policy. We welcome Dr. Craig Anderson. Welcome.
That introduction, that makes me sound very impressive. Can everyone hear okay?
Yeah.
Alrighty. So, kia ora, called Craig Toko Inouye. As I've just been introduced, I would call myself a bio-geoscientist. So I'm trying to bring biology and earth sciences together. So in late 2008, I started a postdoc here at Lincoln with Leo Condren, looking at how soil microbial ecology changes when biochar is added. Oops, let's not get too carried away. Now, biochar is promoted as a soil conditioner. It improves soil physical structure, and that improvement in physical structure then aids biological and chemical processes in the soil, and the function of the soil. Biochar is also promoted as a climate solution whereby we capture CO2 with biomass, preferably waste material, pyrolyze that, so that's burning the waste in a low oxygen atmosphere to create a long-lived carbon product that we bury in the soil and improve it. So a win-win-win solution. What's not to like? Through this research, I then sort of thought, well, why is this research important? So I took a step backwards, and that led me down quite a deep rabbit hole that I'm going to try and describe in the next 25 minutes. So let me first summarize this talk with a story. We built something. Some call it civilization, some call it modernity, some call it the globalized industrial world, and some call it a superorganism. Because when you take a really wide boundary view, it behaves like a biological system. This thing that we built has an operating system called an economy, and that operating system became a really hungry beast. So we had to build a really complex system to feed it. And that system, much like a biological system, harnesses energy flows, so that's the red arrows, resource flows, which are the blue-gray arrows, and produces heat and waste. And we dump that into the environment. And some of that waste is obviously toxic. Now, it wasn't always this complex. First, we fed it with wood, along with animal fats and plant oils. Then we harnessed the energy of the animals themselves. Then we added water and wind. Then we added coal. Then we added oil. Then we developed electricity and a whole new set of ways to fatten up the beast. Then we added natural gas. Then we got clever and we harnessed the atom. Then we turned to the heavens and we created systems to convert solar energy into electricity via photovoltaics, wind turbines, and wave devices. And through all these energy additions, we dug deeper and deeper, we drilled deeper and deeper, we pumped faster and faster, and the superorganism got bigger and bigger and more complex. We even feed people into the operating system. But the world has limits, and we want to keep this operating system alive and preferably growing, while at the same time adding more and more complexity. The end. I don't know how the story ends. So let's have a crack at trying to unpack this. So we're going to start with the ideas of ecologist Howard Odum and his student Charles Hall, who in the early 70s pioneered the concept of energy return on energy invested. Now, this isn't a perfect metric, but it's a simple one, and I think it explains the situation relatively well. Another name for this is the energy cost of energy. So how much energy do we need to put in order to get energy out to use? So it costs energy to drill a well. It costs energy to dig up coal. What's the balance? So the concept is quite simple. In biology, it is 100% unsustainable if an organism uses more energy finding food than it gets in return after eating the food. If you do that, then you're dead. This concept can be applied across multiple scales and disciplines, from a single microbial cell right through to modern civilization, with the latter being what we're going to concern ourselves with today. To date, we've used about 50% of Earth's fossil fuel endowment of oil, gas, and coal. When we started extracting fossil fuels, it was pretty easy. We'd put 1 barrel of oil energy equivalent in to our drilling infrastructure, for example, and we'd get 100 out. So that's an EROEI, so energy return on energy invested, of 100. So that's on the left-hand side of this figure. So the light blue is the energy that we're putting in, and the dark blue is the energy that we're getting out. Now we're going offshore, we're drilling deeper, we're applying new technologies in order to source oil from far more difficult geological conditions. Now we use at least 10 barrels of oil energy equivalent to get that 100 barrels out, an EROEI of 10 or lower. If we examine all other raw materials, it is the same story. We've taken the easy, low-hanging fruit first, and what's left is much harder, more energy intensive, and more expensive to get. Copper is a good example of this, where the grades of ore are now about 100-fold lower than historical deposits, and the energy costs to get the copper out are about 10-fold higher. In the meantime, our population has expanded exponentially, and so have our expectations. The estimated EROEI to sustain our current civilization at a bare bones basic level, according to Charles Hall, is 7. And we've been flirting with 7 for some time. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why is this guy talking about fossil fuels? Aren't we transitioning? And the answer is, yeah, nah. At this point, our modern civilization is still greater than 90% reliant on primary energy from fossil fuels. Despite global installed renewable capacity approaching 50% and electricity production from that installed capacity being around 35%, the electricity sector only provides about 1/5 of the overall energy used globally, while overall energy demand continues to increase. So, for example, we're building giant data centers now that need lots of electricity. New Zealand finds itself in a lucky position, however, of having 80 to 85% renewable electricity, but in reality, our economy is 80% fossil fuel dependent when we consider our overall energy needs. Within that 80% fossil fuel dependence, all liquid fuels are derived from overseas. Our domestic natural gas supplies are due to run out within about a decade. Hence some of the reasoning why the government was thinking about building an LNG terminal. So Australia, for example, is one of the largest producers of LNG. And I presume that's where we were going to get the LNG from. And we also have varying grades of domestic coal that we use primarily for industrial heat, manufacturing and electricity production. The electricity sector and the renewables within are also entirely dependent on fossil fuels and the oil industry for mining raw materials and providing chemical feedstocks and turning those materials into electrical supply infrastructure such as concrete, steel, aluminium, copper, resins, plastic, composites, cabling, solar panels, turbines, etc., and for maintenance, upgrading, expansion, replacement, recycling, and disposal of infrastructure components when they reach end of life. So just transitioning is not that easy. Current turnover for wind and solar is about 30 years. It's about 50 to 100 years for geothermal and hydro, and about 30 to 80 years for fossil fuel and nuclear powered electrical infrastructure. So in theory, electrifying everything seems plausible, but the system's reality is very different, specifically because geology and physics set the boundaries of what is actually possible. That's not to say that we can't run a version of civilization on electrified technologies, but it just won't look like the civilization that we currently have today. To enable comparison of apples to apples, EROEI calculations should consider all energy used to deliver energy at the point of use. So, for example, the supply of petrol at the pump versus the supply of electricity at your EV charging station. Delivery of energy requires things like refineries for the fuel or electrical transmission infrastructure for the EV charging infrastructure. So what to include and how to account for energy used to supply energy gets complex very quickly. And this is one of the places where EROEI calculations fall over because it's so complex that you just can't bring everything in. So at best, these are best guess estimates. If EROEI is only calculated with respect to the energy at source, rather than at the point of use, we greatly underestimate the actual energy and resources required to run and maintain our complex civilization. And this is where a lot of our aspirations fall over because we haven't done our due diligence properly on actually deciding how much energy do we need to maintain all this infrastructure. So on this diagram, coal at the mine has an EROEI of 80, but in reality, the net energy delivered is much lower as there are transport losses, thermal losses, transmission losses, etc. This is where engineers start talking about exergy versus energy, but let's not get into that. EROEI can improve with technology. For example, solar and wind efficiencies have gone up since the publication of this diagram, but not much. And we often run into non-linear cost increases relative to efficiency gains. Best estimates suggest that we no longer have energy source combinations that can deliver an EROEI greater than 10 at the scales required to meet our expectations. Our civilization was built using high EROEI fuels and industrial feedstocks, and that civilization is now sleepwalking into an energy crisis. Our modern food system alone represents 10 calories of fossil fuel energy going in for every edible calorie coming out. So 30% of global energy is used to produce food from farm to fork, with about 70% of that used beyond farm gate. Connecting energy to the economy requires us to look at how much net energy is delivered that can support economic activity. The increase in red arrow thickness represents a larger volume of energy required to get energy as the EROEI deteriorates. If the overall volume of energy is expanding, then we don't really notice deterioration in EROEI, but economic growth rates likely contract. So a situation like this occurred in the 1970s, for example. So post-war up to the 1970s, we had really high growth rates. Then we had onshore high-quality oil in America peaking and declining, and we ended up finding oil elsewhere. But the growth rate, the GDP growth rate, declined after the 1970s, and now it's actually flatlined. Where was I? So if there is no expansion of energy supply, or it slows down or stops, and this is pertinent with relationship to the Hormuz situation, The net energy available for driving economic activity competes with energy that we need to deliver essentials, resulting in persistent inflationary pressure under all goods and services. So any perturbation in energy supply quickly impacts economic activity, our ability to support human development needs, and to deliver on other goals such as environmental protection and restoration. So economists often quote that the energy industry generates only about 10% of global GDP. But in reality, the net energy supplied by the energy industry underpins 100% of economic activity. Energy is the economy. So this is probably the most important correlation that economists ignore. There are no rich countries that consume low amounts of energy. Prosperity measured as GDP is highly correlated to energy use. And the same is true for social progress. So the relationship's not as great here, but it's still going up. So countries with low energy availability struggle to deliver social progress. So I'm not sure where New Zealand sits on this graph, but we usually have quite high social development scores, and our oil use per capita is a little bit higher than Denmark. So we're probably above the line and to the right of Denmark. So why are global economies sputtering? Simply put, the net energy derived from fossil fuel production stagnated pre-COVID, and overall EROEI has potentially dropped below 7. So, oops, wrong button. So everything below this green wedge is energy that's delivered into the global economy, and everything above is the energy that we're using to get that oil and energy to the market. So as you can see, the amount of energy that we're using is exploding. And I've calculated a very rough EROEI here of 5. Now, Charles Hall reckons that to have a bare bones basic society, you need an EROEI of 7. So we're probably pretty close to 10, which is one of the reasons why we're struggling. And I put here FHTF. We don't know what that means. It means shit hits the fan. 2030. So that's when oil supply starts declining, and we have this massive energy input in order to get that oil. So there's heaps of oil out there, but because we've taken all the good stuff first, we're left with all the stuff that's quite difficult to pull out of the ground. So if you have a closer look at this diagram, preceding economic recessions in the mid-70s, early 80s, 90s, the dot-com crash in 2000, 2008 financial crisis, and from about 2020 onwards, there were perturbations in oil production. At least 2 of these recessionary periods were relieved when new extraction methodologies became economic and matured, such as deep offshore drilling in the North Sea in the 80s. So that's included in this light grey wedge. And fracking in the USA post-2008. That's this bright yellow. With respect to the foundations of the economy that you and I interact with every day, the fraction of oil that is most important is diesel. So I've written here that these oil sources are the ones that we get the majority of our diesel from, and this red line here is Canadian tar sands. We also get a bit of diesel out of that. So diesel runs tractors, think agriculture, trucks, trains, ships, think supply chains, mining, construction equipment, think commodities, roading, building, etc. So diesel production rates slowed down at around 2008. And this is one of the reasons why we had the global financial crisis in 2008. And they didn't really do much right through to about 2018. But the rough peak, according to people much smarter than me, was 2018. And this is because the crude oil sources that delivered decent quantities of diesel into the economy peaked and are now declining. So although oil production has been going up since 2008 because of fracking, the resulting shale oil, and it's also known as light tight oil, has lower heavy fractions from which diesel, jet fuel, and shipping fuels are derived. In each barrel of oil, such as that derived from the Middle East and Russia, we get 25 to 35% diesel, whereas light tight shale oil gives us maybe 10 to 20% by volume, depending on oil field. Oil price doesn't factor in the ratios of different fuels delivered into the economy. So tight supply is increasing costs for economic sectors that are reliant on heavier fuels, and those costs amplifying through the supply chain, resulting in an increased cost of living for us. So that's where our cost of living crisis is coming from, and there's nothing that our governments can do about it. So the oil glut that you may have heard about pre-Iran war is actually a light fraction glut. So that's lots of petrol, plastic precursors, and gas, so natural gas liquids. So yeah, in the paper we often read that, oh, we've got this oil glut and yet we've still got this cost of living crisis. So that's an explanation behind what's going on there. So the cost of living increases results in demand destruction, obviously, but that ripples out through the entire economy. And increases in electricity prices also reflect an unbalanced fossil fuel supply, as systems maintenance, upgrades and expansion all rely on heavy fuels like diesel. So economic growth opportunities in the energy-intensive productive economy are disappearing and the costs are going up, while the low energy intensity unproductive economy, so the FIRE economy, so that's finance, insurance and real estate, has exploded along with inequality and unconventional ways to keep juicing the economy and pretending that we have growth. So these graphs come from Dr. Tim Morgan, and he came up with a model called the feeds model. So this model, he tries to more accurately account for the energy cost of energy. So if the energy cost of energy is properly accounted for, then it becomes clear that prosperity, so that's the red lines, will decline, as energy constraints will mean we will need to spend more on securing energy for delivering essentials in a perfect world. There will be less net energy, so that translates to money and capacity available for investment and discretionary spending. So that MRI that you want in the hospital, probably not going to happen because we won't be able to afford it because we have to produce food. So this is true for all countries and underpins the great power politics that we're observing at the moment. And the social upheavals that we're observing at the moment, as resource scarcity is now colliding with monetary hegemony. So there's a reason why America is trying to control the world's energy supplies through the petrodollar, takeovers, proxy wars, and direct wars, because energy is the master economic lever. So if America wants to stay on top, they can control the energy. That means that they can keep China under control. So that's about it. Going to finish with two system scenarios before we launch into discussions to demonstrate why it's more than just fuel that is a problem with respect to fossil fuels. So the first one, so with regard to the Hormuz situation, economists predict that the market will pivot to meet supply demand. Many countries have turned to the Americas and Africa. All production, this is oil production, relies on kilometers of oil country tubular goods, so OCTG. So this is steel casings, tubing, drill pipes, and China and Japan are the leading suppliers of OCTG goods. OCTG requires a mix of high-strength, alloyed, and corrosion-resistant materials which require input of high-grade iron ore. The predominant supplier of this is the Pilbara region in Australia, with Australia also producing high-quality coal for steel making. Australia uses huge volumes of diesel to run these mines, with the fuel situation in Australia being similar to that in New Zealand, with reliance on Asian refineries for 90% of their fuel needs, and those refineries in turn getting about 80% of their crude oil input from the Middle East. So it's quite a vicious circle. We want to increase production elsewhere. There's this massive linkage of dependencies. So second scenario, sour crude is refined to remove sulfur. This sulfur is predominantly used for making sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is used to liberate phosphorus from phosphate rock as phosphoric acid and gypsum. And phosphoric acid is used to create phosphate fertilizers, while gypsum is also used as a soil conditioner. About 95% of phosphate fertilizers produced require sulfuric acid in their manufacture. Sulfuric acid is also used in production of potassium sulfate, which makes up about 10% of potassium fertilizer market. The chemical manufacturing industries and global metal supply and fabrication also have a heavy reliance on sulfuric acid for various leaching and purification processes. And research institutes such as this need chemicals in our laboratories and fertilizers to conduct our work. And this, of course, assumes that we can even get what we need shipped to us. The Middle East happens to be responsible for about 50% of global shipborne sulfur and chemical trade. Sulfuric acid is also crucial for the semiconductor industry, as is helium, which is derived from natural gas, with 30% of supply lost through the bombing of Qatar's gas infrastructure. So if you thought the COVID supply chain chaos was bad, we ain't seen nothing yet. And all these impacts have not filtered through yet. So we'll see these impacts probably in the latter part of this year as they start kicking in. So this is supposed to be a vibe event, and I've probably completely destroyed the vibe. But that's a very high-level view of the global situation.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks very much, Craig. There's absolutely some time for questions now and comments. And so,
just point out that this picture here is renewable energy being used to power a drill rig. That's not AI generated, that's actually real. And the opening slide was a mine in Australia that claims to be clean and green. However, so they've got a bunch of solar panels and wind turbines, but they also have this massive bank of diesel generators. And yeah, it's basically just greenwashing garbage. Anyway, sorry.
Shannon, please.
So yeah, cool enjoyed it. Do you take into account the fact that when you move to renewable solar wind, it's just way more efficient system. So if I have an electric car with solar panels, my energy consumption for transport goes down by 75%. This university, we replaced coal, we wasted water. Energy was coming out of the ground. Yeah, reducing energy consumption hugely. The same thing. You take that into account when they look.
You can take that into account. So when I said that engineers talk about exergy versus energy, that's what they're talking about. So an electrical system is much more efficient than a fossil fuel system. So we lose, let's say, a third of the energy contained in the fossil fuels just through heat. So this is the kind of thing that you're talking about. So when we convert to electricity generation, wind and solar is about two to three times more efficient. Distributed generation, 1.1 times efficient. Heat pumps, 3 to 4 times efficient. There's a whole bunch of things that we can do that we're going to save an enormous amount of energy. But I usually think about it in terms of scaling. If we're wanting to do this globally, it's okay for us here, rich people in the West, to start adopting all these systems. But how is that equitable, for example? So realistically, we kind of need to take a step down in order to enable other people to step up. The other thing that I want to point out is this. So this comes from this guy Walter, 2025, the electro tech revolution. So this is what we assume to be a fossil fuel system. dinosaurs dying, millions of years go by, we suck the oil out, we refine it, we stick it in our car, and this is what we think our EV situation looks like. Sun, solar panel, plug your car in, charge it up, but in reality it looks like that. So you've got this massive mine site. Actually, I've got some notes on this one. Silica production requires an arc furnace. So in this silicon smelter, there's 3 1-meter diameter carbon electrodes that are penetrating the surface of charge of coal, coke, wood chips, and quartz rock. Each electrode is 10 to 20 meters tall, consumes megawatts of electricity over the 8 to 10 hours needed to convert that silicon dioxide into pure silicon. And this is a steel mill, which is also powered by coal. So we can't really, I mean, yeah, these systems are fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I have an electric bike and I have a Prius and love it, but got to recognize that even if we converted everything to electrical infrastructure, all we're really doing is changing the timeline. So we're still producing heat, we're still producing waste. We've just changed the timeline.
Right, Christian, couple of questions in there.
First of all, thanks, Greg. Brilliant big picture thinking. Really appreciate that. Very sobering. First question, I'm sorry, I've got 2 is,
Yeah.
So we're sleepwalking into this as advanced economies. Is that because people in positions of leadership don't know this stuff, or it's just too difficult to do anything about? And second question is, does it make any difference that, technically speaking, a lot of the electrical infrastructure, renewable energy, could be generated with rebuildable machines? So once you've mined some of these minerals, to a certain extent, you should be able to recycle and rebuild at lower energy investment and extraction in the first place.
First question is, I am pretty confident most politicians don't understand the implications.
It's money supply, and that seems simple.
True. Those that do probably throw their hands up in despair as well. It is a massive, massive problem. To your second question, as I understand it, again, recycling requires us to put in a whole bunch of energy to get things recycled. And at every stage, so say you start with the lithium and you recycle that lithium battery, the first recycling, you'll get maybe 90% of that lithium back. And then you'll recycle it again and it'll go down another 10% and so on and so on and so on. So eventually you still need to mine materials. So you can't recycle forever. And the math looks different for every single component.
Yeah, Christian.
Right, remember Martin Luther King, I have a dream.
Yeah.
I have a dream too that my gas guzzling car one day have some fluid, and I'll still get to Queenstown on full tank. Any insights? How that could apply?
The current situation, if you look at, so we have this buffer, right, that the NBAE talks about, the minimum obligation, I can't remember what it's called. It's on the fuel clock. So it's like a 30-day buffer. So normally we have about 8 ships a day, I think, or is it a week? Might be 8 ships a week coming to New Zealand to deliver fuel. And at the moment, we're lucky to get 1 or 2. So we are topping up that supply all the time, but we're slowly whittling away at the buffer. So eventually we're going to get to 0. And I'm pretty disappointed in the government that they haven't already introduced supply restrictions. And I'm pretty disappointed that they haven't annexed off a whole bunch of diesel already for agricultural purposes and for transport of essential goods like food for the coming season at least. So this isn't going to be a short crisis. So we've lost 10, let's call it 10% of global fossil fuel supply. and we were running things at a pretty tight margin. So losing that is massive, plus all the other things that we've lost. And there was a French report that came out from the French government that said that about 40% of the infrastructure in the Middle East has been destroyed. So it's going to be years before we get that production back, if ever. There's also issues with so a lot of these countries, because they hadn't been able to load oil onto ships, they've had to shut down their oil fields. And starting those oil fields back up again is really problematic. So when oil fields start getting lower on oil, say you get down to 50%, we actually pump water in to push the oil out. And it's a really complex process. Apparently you have your oil well, but you surround the oil well with water pumping down, and you're trying to sort of jiggle this oil into a spot where it's going to go out the oil well. So starting that process up again is really, really difficult, and often even the rock itself collapses. So we might not ever get that supply back. So basically, this is just as a dry run for what shit hits the fan in 2032. I think we've brought that that timeline forward.
Given the current New Zealand administration seems under comprehensively addicted to fossil fuel, Verity Johnson, the journalist, had a lovely line a couple of weeks ago about talking about how this government has got rid of so many of the production things that they were doing, sort of saying that they were like an angry boyfriend, a jealous boyfriend coming in and throwing out everything the last one we done. Because, and John Key did the same when he came in. He said, just don't bullshit the Labour, we can't do anything in relation to that. Policy. So we've got this sort of government in place that doesn't want to see any of this. Have you got any advice on how you get them to see this?
No, zero. We need people like you and local communities to be prepared, basically, for the worst, because I don't think the government's going to come to the rescue. We need to rescue ourselves if the worst happens. It might not. I could be completely and utterly wrong, and I really do hope that this is all bullshit. But I don't think it is.
There's plenty of questions there. We come at the back to the front.
Yeah.
Here, down through here. Finish this. 5 questions.
Yeah. A lot of it's doom and gloom, and probably we'll just want to go and put the covers over our heads when we get home. But what, in your view, what combination of sort of technology efficiency gains, energy substitution, etc., can stop it being a big decline and at least a plateau? And do you think that's possible, or do we give up?
I think it's possible, but not with the economic settings that we have. So we shouldn't be wasting the fossil fuel that we've had. For example, it's an amazing resource. You've got this liquid that you can transport around. It's energy dense. You can stick it in your tractor and you can do huge amounts of work. 1 barrel of oil has 5 years of a human labor in it. So if you think, if you paid 100 grand a year, a barrel of oil should cost 500 grand. That's how much work we're getting out of a barrel of oil, and yet it only costs us what, 150 bucks? It's ridiculous how cheap oil is, and we just squander it. So yeah, we should be preserving the fossil fuels that we have now. We should be putting that energy into building out renewable infrastructure, but that would require everybody in this room, everybody in the Western world mainly, to step a long way down in our expectations on what a good life is. So we need, there's a psychological thing there as well. What is a good life?
Do you see potential in hydrogen as a fuel source?
Absolutely not. It is energy negative. So it's not an energy source, it's an energy carrier. So in order to make it useful, we need to maybe use electrolysis, for example, requires a huge amount of energy, electrical energy going in. Then we don't actually have the technology to contain it. So we stick it in a cylinder and we lose little bits at a time. So we lose energy there. So yeah, if you put it on an EROEI plot, actually, Professor Susan Krumdiek, who used to be at Canterbury University, she's now in here at Watt University in the UK. I used to think that hydrogen could be a thing, and she sat me down and said, let me explain to you why this is complete rubbish. Even bioenergy, for example, falls into that pretty low energy return on investment category. So it has to be pretty poor land and that you would put bioenergy crops on. Yeah, you don't want to be taking that land away from food production.
Couple more questions as well, yeah. Then I'll leave the last one to Serena.
Federico here, my teacher is Shannon, he was just sitting here. Studying energy and transport, and I had a few questions, but I'll just make a quick one. How does the hydrogen sector, like, is it like really negative just nowadays, or is it considering the fact that it might get more efficient in the future?
From what I've read, I don't think it will ever get over the line. So there's a guy that I follow on LinkedIn actually, who's an industrial engineer who basically walked away from the hydrogen industry because he realized that this is it was a waste.
Hydrogen is crippled in two ways. One, the actual physics of the amount of energy you've got to put into water to get the hydrogen out, and then the amount of energy you lose turning the hydrogen back into something useful. Because hydrogen by itself is not a lot of use. You can build airships, and that's about it. The physics of it is bad. But the other bad part is the mechanical engineering that you allude to. It is the smallest molecule. So trying to put it inside something and keep it there, and it's a gas. So you've got to compress it down hugely. And a lot of the energy loss is in that compression process and the decompression process. So hydrogen, when you put it on the whiteboard, wonderful. Blue-green, but when you dig into the physics and the mechanical engineering, if you want a mechanical engineer, it's impossible.
Basically, the best way forward is batteries. If we're going that pathway.
But do you suggest salt batteries, or lithium is going to be the only solution?
I think it depends on what your application is. So for a large scale battery for powering a building like this, then yeah, if you've got a huge amount of space, you could probably get away with a salt battery. But yeah, if you want it to be light and you want to pack as much energy in there as possible into a small space, then lithium is probably still the way to go. I'm sure there's new battery technologies that will come out that'll be better, but I'm no physicist, so and I'm not a chemical engineer, so I have no idea, to be honest, what technology is coming. But the other thing that you need to continually ask yourself, is it scalable? And I think it's impossible for everybody in this room to have an electric car, for example. We need to get into a situation where we have an electric bus to carry everybody instead, rather than we all rely on our own vehicles. It's just not scalable.
Great. I'll before I wrap up, I will just note the sustainability features of this particular building, which is the heating and cooling provided to a ground source heat pump system, which comes from outside, the woolen carpet on the floor, the woolen insulation in the roof here, which is available. That we have decommissioned the coal boiler and are now fully electric in the university, and we have engaged in a pretty determined approach to solar energy generation for this particular campus. It's some of the key sustainability features, but some of them very evident in this particular building here that we're considering today. I'm going to wrap up there in the interest of time. I know you have a question, but I'm sure you can answer it after the topic. Great. Thank you very much for your time today and your presentation around the energy system on a global scale. I think we do have some very pressing issues here in New Zealand around just around the diesel. So do we have enough diesel left over if there is a fuel crisis to put our crops in the ground? Do we have enough diesel to enable artificial insemination technicians to drive around the country to ensure our total herd is inseminated and we get all our dairy cows and calves later this year? Those are some of the things that, as a sort of a land-based sector and agricultural sector, that we really have to grapple with as we advance into these things, which are really important for the overall productivity of this and economics of this economy. But great, thank you very much for that presentation today. There is an opportunity to join towards some refreshment from the floor outside. Thank you very much.